Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. We got a lot of questions, so we're going to jump right on into it. Okay, first one, a bit of a softball. Kevin, I think you're the one here as the expert who can answer this. Why is Worf in this movie? Isn't he a Next Generation character?
There's no disrespect to the questioner, but there's a faulty premise behind the question. Worf is not in this movie. Michael Dorn, the actor who plays Worf, is in this movie, playing his own grandfather. He is Worf's son of Moog. Moog is the son of the Klingon who serves as defense attorney in here. And it is Moog who remains behind at Khitomer after the Khitomer Accords, and he, along with his wife, are massacred there. And that is how Worf comes to live with the Rodchenkos in Next Generation. So Worf's not in this movie. His grandpa is. They're just played by the same actor. And good for Michael Dorn for getting the job. Just speaking as an actor, I'm glad you got it.
Amen to that. It seems that in today's constant war of words, there is no dialogue and no forgiveness. What lessons from the film can we apply? Who wants to tackle that one? Any and all.
The first thing that came to my mind is faith. You have to have faith and you have to take a risk if peace and well-being is really the goal of our lives. That, to me, that was the message of the film in that particular question.
I would just add that it takes a willingness to. I think of Kirk and his willingness to understand that I don't trust these people. Look at what they've done to my family, and yet somehow he has the wisdom to see, that they're only going to progress if he opens up. And I think it's all about opening up your mind and heart to stories, and I think that takes a lot of faith also.
It also strikes me that the first step in the film is, let's just sit down and talk. Let's sit around the table over a bottle of Romulan ale, which turns out to be a bad idea, but just being willing to sit down and talk. And when unpleasant things are said or prejudices are reaffirmed, we got to move past that and keep talking. That the first person to swing a punch is the first person who has run out of ideas and things to say.
Good point.
Well, I think it's that reminder too, and there's a lot of messages around hope. There's a lot of messages around faith. There's a lot of messages around dialogue. And it's that reminder that even in the world today, where it feels like we're losing that dialogue, that it's still part of our humanity, and even each one of us. And this can be a reminder that each and every one of us in our own lives can reignite that commitment to dialogue. And what can we do? And the message of the movie is that each one of the characters interacts with dialogue. Each one of the characters makes new commitments to dialogue, to reconciliation, to forgiveness. And I think it's a reminder for us that no matter what's going on in the world around us, we can make that commitment in our own lives.
Along those same lines, here's another question. If I can't forgive and forget, can I still make peace?
If you think of the Amish and the film Amish Grace, the documentary about what happened in Amish country a few years ago when all those girls were killed by this man, the Amish forgave. They went and forgave. Excuse me. But they said that we forgive him because we do it for ourselves and for him. But that doesn't take away that this man must ask for God's forgiveness. That it doesn't take away the response or the justice that is due, that he must do before God to make up for this. It doesn't mean it erases the bad deed that he did. So I always think that's a really interesting way to look at it. Of course, the Gospels basically tell us to forgive and forget, but I think we need to remember and learn. It's yes, we forgive. Yes, we have to do it for ourselves as well as the person, but it doesn't let them off the hook, so to speak.
It takes a tremendous amount of empathy and compassion for oneself to be able to take a step to move into forgiveness. In my experience, it's a little bit easier when you lean into forgiveness in some way, and you moved. And again, I agree with the sister. It doesn't absolve anything necessarily, but I find for me personally, in the times in my life where I have been invited to forgive, whether it was explicit or not, it's helped me move forward. And so I think that's perhaps some of the lessons of the movie in order to get to the undiscovered country. Is part of that is forgiveness.
But I think we can remember too that forgiveness, and both of you have alluded to this or mentioned this, forgiveness doesn't mean condoning an act. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you're saying that everything's okay. Forgiveness is a way to release resentment and to find reconciliation and resolution in ways that offer new possibilities for the future, but don't necessarily say that, well, this is okay. Forgiveness can be a releasing of a burden and a releasing of a burden of resentment.
Here's another one. I might tweak this one a bit too. Here's the question as it is. Is Spock a scientist or a mystic?
Yes.
My addition would be, can they be both? Yes? No?
I love the line in the movie where where I think it's Spock. He says logic is only the beginning. I think we mentioned it during the panel, and I like the Spock of part 3. I don't think would ever say that, or maybe it's there's a certain point in Spock's, and maybe Kevin, you can speak to this more, development where I don't know if he would have said that, but his more human side, if you will, I think leads him to understand that while logic is very important, you can't have it without the other side.
I would argue, is Spock a mystic or a scientist? Yes, he is. And that is perfectly compatible. You have people of deep faith who are scientists. Spock is coming out of Vulcan mysticism and the Vulcan belief system, which is somewhat sketched out over the course of the series and the movies. But I'm also struck by the moment at the end of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. At the beginning of the film, Spock is sort of just gone through this entire relearning process where he's demonstrating that he's got all of his memory back and all his intelligence back. And the final question on the test is, how are you? And he says, I don't understand the question. And they said, well, look, you're half human and you're a living sentient being. How are you? And his mother comes out and says, in order for you to be a full person, you need to embrace all these sides of you. And at the end of the film, he meets up with his father again, and his father says, well, I'm heading back to Vulcan. They do the typical Vulcan/New England exchange of, it is gratifying to see you as well. Let's not be emotional. And he says, do you have any messages for your mother? And he says, yes, tell her I am fine. And it's so emotionally weighted because, he's like, I'm not just science. I'm not just logic. Logic is the beginning of wisdom, not its end. And throughout the show, the most fun parts for me are the parts where Spock allows himself to be less logical, to be non-scientific, to play even, because it is a reminder that you need all of that within you to be a complete being.
Along those lines, Kevin, let me kick this one to you. Why does a franchise whose creator is a professed humanist seem to always deal with issues of faith? Is that true about Roddenberry? I don't know his personal life very well.
I've read his biography and all the writings about him. He is an avowed humanist, but throughout the whole series, I just want to point out two presuppositions here, that Roddenberry is solely responsible for the thing that is Star Trek. He's its creator, but since then, there have been dozens, if not hundreds of people, including the individual actors. As we talked about on the panel on Wednesday, the whole Vulcan greeting, the Roddenberry is like to Leonard Nimoy, who's Jewish, just come up with how Vulcans say hi to each other, and he's like, oh, this becomes this. Okay, here we are. This hand gesture that is done in various Jewish rituals becomes Vulcan. And so you can't avoid incorporating those things. There's an episode of the original series in which one of their favorite things in the original series to do is to sort of go back and visit civilizations pre-23rd century, that there's a planet that's still Rome, Imperial Rome, but they have television, or there's a planet that's Nazi Germany, and the Enterprise. Kirk's favorite hobby is violating the Prime Directive. He's like, oh, they've modeled their whole society after Nazi Germany. We have to totally destroy this planet. And in the Roman one, they keep talking about worshiping the sun, and Uhura finally says, oh, they're talking about the Son of God, Jesus Christ. It's the only overt reference to Christianity in the original series, but it's an indicator that contemporary human faith is still present in the future. And I think if your whole point is the human adventure has just begun, faith, spirituality, religion are part of the human adventure, and we don't leave them behind just because we have rockets and laser beams and atomic bombs and microwaves. So I think even though Roddenberry himself was like, technology, progress, modernism, yes, but also there's something bigger than us. There's something deeper than us. When you go outside and look at the night sky, I find it very difficult not to feel an overwhelming sense of awe in my own smallness. And at the same time, witnessing the glory of creation, sometimes it is something as simple as a butterfly or a blade of grass. So you don't erase that just because we have, bullet trains.
Do you know Vatican II in its final document basically said that what is truly human is truly of God, the gospel, and what is truly of God is truly human. So being a humanist there's so much in being a humanist that is of faith. So I think that there's no conflict there, for me anyway.
Well, that might be a good segue into this question, Kevin, Rose, thank you. Do you see speculative fiction as a platform for interfaith dialogue?
I do. I think pedagogically, as a teaching method, to go into a safe place like speculative fiction, it just takes away the walls and the boundaries and the limits, and you can speak freely because you're speaking about a story and you're speculating, and things can emerge and come out, and you can speak about them safely because you're not, well, this is your brother-in-law or this is, your sister. This becomes, I think, a safe place to talk about things that matter.
Any other thoughts on that one?
I would say the most successful way that I've seen interfaith dialogue play out is through stories. When I sit down with someone who I deeply disagree with, politically, culturally, religiously, and I lean into forgiveness and I lean into listening to their story, I can't think of a time where I have not, my shoulders haven't dropped and I have not somehow fell in love with the person a little bit more. Or at least come to some understanding. I still may disagree with them politically, religiously, culturally, but listening and truly listening and hearing their story has always allowed me to somehow gain a little bit more understanding, respect, empathy, compassion. And so I think, Star Trek or any stories that allow us to get to that place is good and fun when it comes in the shape of this movie.
Certainly, sci-fi is about when a culture meets a culture coming through the rye quite often, and all that culture contains. Its faith, its stories, that people's sense of identity. And this is something that really fully can be explored in the television versions of Star Trek because we can get to know these cultures quite well. And as has already been said, when you find the other people's stories, they begin to make a lot more sense, and you understand sometimes the choices that they've made that seem anathema to you suddenly, from their perspective, make a lot more sense and therefore become far less threatening. I'm also struck by the ability of speculative fiction in and of itself to explore faith in very real ways that allow for greater understanding of other faiths, whether it's a constructed faith that you find in a book, where it's world building, the old gods and the new, for example, in George Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, but also Ray Bradbury's Christus Apollo. which blew my mind when I first read it, where he asks, was there some Sea of Galilee made of liquid hydrogen that his feet walked across? And this notion of, all right, if you're a Christian and we discover an alien race, what happens if, was there an incarnation among that alien group as well? What if they have their own ethical system? What if they have their own sense as a chosen people? What does that mean for us? So speculative fiction allows for us to imagine all of these things and sort of conduct thought experiments that I think make us better people and better able when we encounter the other, that who is other to us, they are a self to themselves, make us more able to enter into that dialogue in a spirit of openness and understanding.
Well said. Felicia, any thoughts yourself?
Well, I think because it takes us out of the space of the ordinary, it allows for possibilities, and it takes us out of the space of kind of our history that might be charged with prejudice or charged with preconceived notions. So to go into an imagined world of speculative fiction allows us the possibility to work through our places of commonality and our commonality around faith, around tradition, around dialogue, and looks for those places. And I think in terms of that question of interfaith dialogue, looks for those places of commonality, looks for those places of the spirit itself.
Excellent. I think we have time. We have 1 minute, so we've got time for one more question we'll squeeze in here, although this might be, it's an industry question, so this might take a little time. But we'll see if we can squeeze into a minute. I work in the entertainment industry where sci-fi and speculative fiction still has much of a stigma, yet appears to be dominating in the marketplace. And the individual cites examples from Marvel, DC, Star Wars films, things like that. How do you square this circle? Are there any, Rose, Kevin, or industry insiders, any thoughts on how you feel about?
Can you reread the question, the beginning part of that question, please?
This individual writes, I'm in the entertainment industry where, in this person's opinion, appears that sci-fi and speculative fiction still have much of a stigma, yet still seem to dominate the marketplace.
Does it have a stigma if it's dominating the marketplace? It seems like it's for my whole life, really. It seems like speculative fiction has been, starting with Star Wars in '77. But I don't, Kevin, sister, I
remember Godzilla, for heaven's sakes. I mean, the first one, and I don't know. There must be something he knows that we don't, because if we're looking at the marketplace or the audience reception, it's huge. There's a huge interest and following in science fiction, whether it's from comic books or from or dystopian or whatever that type of science fiction is. Just today on the news, I heard them talking about Minority Report, and I said, "Wow, that's an older movie now." And I wonder how many people out there have even seen it. But it's important, and it's an important genre. So I don't know what he knows, because as long as it makes money, I think the industry is going to.
Kevin, what do you think?
I think that we're talking about two very different things here, and the Hollywood has always been prejudiced against genre, and the literary market has always been prejudiced against genre. Stephen King is the best-selling American author, and yet it's Stephen King. I mean, come on. There is this notion of popular for the hoi polloi, but when it comes awards time, Star Wars was up for Best Picture and lost out to Annie Hall. But for that matter, Citizen Kane was up for Best Picture and lost out to How Green Was My Valley. And no one remembers that film. So I think when it comes to awards, when it comes to critical acclaim, critics for the longest time have dismissed sci-fi as kids stuff. And there is this notion that because it was pulp, because it was popular, because it was aimed at children, that it's not a serious genre to be taken seriously by scholars, by critics. And when it comes awards time, that my big rant in my other life, I also exist as a horror writer, is that the fact that Norman Reedus was never nominated for an acting Emmy for his work on The Walking Dead simply because he was appearing in actors wearing, decayed corpse makeup is a crime. You can look at moments that he's had as that character that is some of the finest acting you will ever see, period, regardless of what genre the show is. It's amazing what he is able to convey with just a look is absolutely brilliant, and yet utterly dismissed by the industry because, you know, we need to give another award to The West Wing or Veep or what have you. Not to speak ill of those shows, but there's this idea that somehow science fiction isn't sophisticated and isn't worthy of serious actors. And yet, as we see, you know, award-winning actors are now appearing in the Marvel Comics universe, Marvel Cinematic Universe, that serious actors are doing Star Wars. And that was sort of, you know, the big get for George Lucas is he had Sir Alec Guinness in the movie. You know, you have these sort of major people. And I would argue one other thing, feel free to dismiss the popular. And I'm an academic. I got more degrees than a thermometer. I'm as elite as they come. And yet I'm not walking around like deeply thinking and constantly rewatching The English Patient. All right. But I would say Star Wars has shaped and given meaning to my life in a very real way. That The West Wing was a lovely show, but it is Star Trek that consumes my thoughts, that makes me reflect upon myself and the world I live in. These are the shows that sort of excite and delight and inform the way I live in a way that the award-winning shows do not. And I think that's true for large numbers of people.
So you're saying that the questioner has identified a high-low culture bias.
Very much so.
There you go.
One that I see on the regular in all the genres I work in. And to that end, cool, because I don't have to watch the Oscars or the Emmys or the Golden Globes because they mean nothing to me.
Instead,
I'd rather watch
there's the next Undiscovered Country for us. Bridge peace between the stigma and the marketplace there. Thank you all very much for your time. I'm grateful. This was a wonderful 3-day discussion, and happy Hanukkah, blessed Advent, and Merry Christmas to all of you. Enjoy the break, and we'll see you all at the next screening in February. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Michael.
Live long
Thank
and
you.
prosper.
Thank you.